I'm dead.
Elliot's dead. Welcome back, and Elliot is dead. We'll be honoring him by purchasing normalnorms.net because .nut is not an option, as we just recently discovered.
Thank God.
This episode sponsored by Norm's Nuts.
Shout out, Norm.
Get your what, boys?
Nut smashed
for free.
Yay.
Yay. Elliot, did you just say knots?
No, I mean, same thing, right?
Garlic knots. New Italian euphemism just dropped.
Jesus. I mean, honestly, does anyone still listen to it? We can just say whatever.
Listen, we've got dozens of listeners.
Great, and I'm sure they're super excited to hear about what nut we're going to be talking about today.
They are. Funny you should ask, though. Elliot.
What, are you going to try to squeeze in a black joke about walnuts?
Ding, 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 ding.
Sad.
Wow.
Black walnut time.
This is creativity at work.
It is. I mean, if I didn't do it, what would we do without it? Really? Like, think about
Happiness, fulfillment.
It's all I know.
Joy.
It's all I know.
It's like that meme. If such and such didn't exist, and it's like the futuristic planet. It's like that's me, basically. If I didn't exist, everything would be great.
That might be a good one. The world without Poor Prole's Almanac.
The world without Andy, more specifically.
It's a polarizing thought.
Polarizing. Speaking of polarizing, we're talking about the black walnut, which is a pretty polarizing plant, depending on who you ask.
Smooth transition.
Like that butter. That black walnut butter.
Can you make black walnut butter?
Is it shelf stable? I don't know. Is it shelf stable? Too much oil in walnuts, right? That'd go rancid.
Yeah, I mean, you can just get oil. There's no actual butter. You could probably like whip it into like a buttery, I don't know.
We're already talking about eating it. Let's learn about the fuckers. What are they? What is it?
Yeah, so black walnut. Black walnuts are a native walnut from much of North America. They're described as having large black nuts with complex flavors. And depending on who you ask, those flavors can be butter or they can be old feet. Depends on your palate. Now, for the non-foraging crowd, the people that just buy their food at grocery stores, the black walnut is kind of a menace to like suburban lifestyle. It drops hundreds, if not thousands, of these like tennis ball-sized drupes that are green and literally look like a tennis ball. They basically are weapons that fall from the sky. You know, you can throw them at your kids. Your neighbor's kids can throw them at you. You know, all that fun stuff.
I mean, it sounds terrible, but at the same time, you can eat it. So if you have these in your neighborhood, you need to tell me where you live.
Just Elliot.
Actually, you know what?
I won't tell anybody else.
This could be a good chance. Why don't we just share addresses on the podcast? That could be fun.
No. You can send them directly to me. You can DM me. It's fine.
Elliot, the ghost of the Poor Prole's Almanac with no public social media profile.
That's right. You can't find me, but I can find you.
Then how are they going to reach you?
See, this is just Fed talk. This is absolutely Fed talk.
Says the man with 3 bags of Tannerite behind him.
We don't talk about stuff on the cameras.
Yeah, they can't see us, Andy.
Oh, right. Anyways, so let's talk about this black walnut. While it has been on the landscape in North America and actually the entire planet longer than even the oak tree.
That's just wild. It's older than oaks as a species.
Hell yeah. It actually originated, the black walnut, as far as we know, in the countries like Midwest and Southeast, and kind of worked its way across the continent. Now, when we think of it, while we, I think, contemporarily think of it as having been a coastal tree, because it tends to live in riparian zones, it's actually had very little documentation of being on the coast until relatively recently, and extremely recently if we're talking about like where some of us live, the Northeast.
All right, so Andy, you're going to have to like define for our listeners what relatively recently is, because that could be like, when you're talking about shit, that could be like the last 10,000 years.
Wow, Matt, not everything has to go that far back.
I mean, but it is a nice change of pace.
Well, evidence suggests the black walnut has existed since at least the late Cretaceous period.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's pre-oak tree, everyone, for those oak listeners. So the delicious or feety black walnut is one of the few foods today we share today with the dinosaurs.
So are you saying Jesus broke walnut bread with dinosaurs?
Wait, are you talking about the wizard Jesus breaking bread with like raptors from Jurassic Park?
For the record, I was absolutely saying that for the record. Now, despite its lengthy time on Earth and existing in every hardwood forest type, they've actually never really played a central role in any forest ecology. That doesn't diminish the important role in like human history, though, right? So people have been eating black walnuts probably since they've existed, which is since humans exist. So despite being a part of our food system across the globe, here in the U.S., it was only really in the early 20th century that the black walnut was really researched with any seriousness.
So what about outside the U.S.?
So walnuts do have a ton of research behind them, primarily in Europe and Asia. Now, black walnuts specifically, not so much.
So what you're saying is it sounds like these black walnuts have like a bunch of history, but nobody really knows about it, the black ones specifically?
Yeah.
It seems typical.
Yeah.
I'm not going to,
Yeah.
I'll let it slide. Continue.
If it makes you feel any better, we're not even talking about white walnuts this season.
It does make me feel a little bit better, I guess, but I didn't know white walnuts were a thing either. I thought they were just walnuts.
Listeners, take notes. This is how to be an ally.
Oh my God.
So all of this research stemmed from two areas, three even. The first was that the black walnut wood was highly valued, so much so they were stripping the lands for lumber, and they needed to figure out a way to grow faster, straighter firewood, or timber, lumber, all that kind of stuff. The second one was around the concern of black walnut wilt. As the permanent agriculture movement was taking off, and they were trying to find ways to introduce tree crops to the rest of agriculture, there's this idea that black walnuts can destroy the soil beneath it for other plants. So people will talk about like black walnut wilt or whatever, and that's this idea that like black walnuts create an environment that nothing else can grow in it. And we're going to talk about the permanent agriculture movement in a few months. So get excited about that.
I've already got my advent calendar set up. It's all nuts.
All nuts. It's nuts. Norm would be so proud. Did Norm sell that advent calendar? I feel like he would.
It just appeared one day on my doorstep. Should I maybe not eat it? I should.
No, you should definitely eat it.
Okay, I'll eat it.
It's probably from Norm's Gnomes.
Norm's Gnomes, who
Christmas.
delivers the nuts.
Yeah, I mean, during the holiday season, he's too busy. So
Yeah.
he's got his boys, Norm's Gnomes. Elliot looks so fucking disappointed right now. It's amazing.
Ugh. No, you know who's actually delivering these nuts is the fucking squirrels that live in my walls.
I mean, I didn't say Norm's Gnomes were human.
Yeah, true. We don't know.
It would just be like Norm to train a herd of squirrels and or raccoons
Mm-hmm.
to deliver advent calendars.
I'm trying to get over the fact that you said permanent agriculture movement twice and you just refused to say permaculture.
No, it's not the same thing.
What?
It's not at all. Yeah, no, I'm serious. We're going to talk about it. This is from the early 20th century. Permaculture did not exist for another 50 years.
But permanent agriculture has been around since it's been around.
And this is the sound of me shaking my hand vigorously in a particular
Are you
direction.
getting ready to throw some dice?
Maybe. Let's get back to black walnuts, though. All right. So a while ago, I think it was episode 99, we talked about foraging and the history of foraging and how it kind of got systematically criminalized. That's really important understanding a lot of these tree crops and how they've evolved in terms of like our diets. Historically, black walnuts have been considered like a pest in farm fields. They tend to sprout up really quickly in deep, fertile soil, so your typical farmlands, right? Basically, wherever you would see black walnuts is places where you didn't want tree crops. You wanted your annuals, so they were considered a weed, basically. Despite it being a weed in that space, that didn't mean farmers weren't, in some ways, casually selectively breeding black walnuts prior. In the 1800s, many farmers were selectively choosing to keep the largest black walnuts that they could find, specifically the ones with the biggest shells, when they were thinning their forests or their pasture edges, or any of those types of things. So they were keeping the ones that were the best. Now, despite this, little work was actually being done to replenish those trees that were lost to clearing, or to keep some genetic diversity going. Organizations like the NNGA sprung up to accelerate the process of sharing knowledge, and cultivars by doing things like contests and journals and basically giving publicity and showing interest in these plants.
You said the NNGA? Is that the Norm's Nuts Growers Association?
Yes, that is it. We only live to serve Norm.
I don't think it is.
He's like the George Soros of this niche content. That is what we have to accept. So George Soros is actually Norm from Normal Nuts, is where we're going with this. Speaking of which, totally unrelated, I think we have a commercial from our good friend Norm.
Hey, it's Normal Norm down at Norm's Nut, and for a limited time, we've got a spooky good sale going on right now. The deals on our big nuts are downright scary. You'll think we blew a gasket giving away our tasty nuts at this price. For a limited time, buy one bag of our famous slow-cooked chestnuts and get a boot bag loaded with an explosion of flavor to take home to your friends and family. You'll turn white like you've just seen a ghost when you get a load of that free bag of nuts. Go find us on the web at normsnuts.nut or visit us down at John Brown Drive now. That's Norm's Nuts.
Good God, it gets worse every single time. Hey, we're back. We're back to talk about those big, black, thick, smelly black walnuts. Isn't that fun?
This is just a blast. Wait, so what does NNGA stand for?
The Northern Nut Growers Association,
Oh.
which still exists. It's like $35 a year to be a member, so everyone should go do that.
If you live in the Northeast, is it just the Northeast?
North America,
The North American continent? Oh, shit.
I think it's actually like the northern part of the continent, but like obviously Southern genetics come up, so I think it's really basically North America or like the United States.
That sounds like a fun way to spend $35.
Doesn't it? And they're not even sponsoring us to do this.
Wow.
So when they get like a bunch of random subscriptions, they're not going to know why.
Tell them Andy sent you.
Yeah, tell them Andy sent you. Just like that book. What was it? The Miyawaki book.
Oh, yeah.
There's like that one place in California that has copies for like $10.
Yeah.
Yeah, we shut those people down. As I was saying before, a lot of breeding work was being done, even if it was very slowly and only recently by institutions and farmers. But it's worth noting that much like the Persian walnuts on the shelves at your grocery stores or the Carpathian walnuts, the breeding work, which had made black walnuts as accessible as they are today, had likely been done by indigenous tribes, and many of those farmers were simply enjoying the fruit of these hundreds of generations of labor.
And then about 100 years later, an obscure podcast spends 3 months talking about these specific farmers.
Not 3 months. Not yet.
We know the list is a real thing, and we've seen the list, Andy.
Yeah, I would say this is an intervention, but we need the content.
It's an intervention I'm ignoring.
We can both do it.
Can you do that?
We can, because I'm doing it. Now, alongside organizations like the NNGA...
Normie norms.
Yeah, normie boy. The TVA, for example, the Tennessee Valley Authority, spent many years from the 30s through the 60s, or through about 1960, not really into the 60s. They were identifying trees and cultivars that were well adapted to the valley under the eyes of the slightly racist Arthur E. Morgan and less racist, or not racist at all, I'm not 100% sure, John W. Hershey. Of course, we can't talk about Hershey without talking about J. Russell Smith, who, while not actually working for the government, had become such a powerful voice in the agricultural sector, was kind of like an unofficial leader of the TVA's work around these plants.
So you said his name was J. Edgar Hoover, but of plants?
Yes. You know, the way he could move plants around the country, you could call him J. Bredger Uber, because he was...
Oh my God, it was like 3 horrible puns
breeding
in one.
them.
No,
breeding
I got
them
it.
and moving them.
You know,
Get it? Bredger.
There are times
Uber.
where I'm proud of the things that are done on this podcast. I think this podcast has had a lot of, interesting conversations, shares a lot of good information. This is not one of those times that I'm proud of what we're putting on the air.
Same.
So I'll just let that sit.
So I'm glad you're here, Matt. Now it's 2 against 1, Andy. Do better.
Wow, what are you, an internet troll? Do better. Anyway,
Oh, man.
as the 1960s rolled in...
Jesus. All right. Just gonna keep going.
Yeah, I'm going to roll right through it, power through. Efforts at this time started to shift from identification of existing black walnuts and instead centered on the breeding for improved genetics. Shortages had become apparent in the walnut timber industry. The focus was placed on breeding faster, straighter black walnuts. But the reality was that our understanding of walnut genetics was still pretty bad. And this basically inhibited a lot of these breeding projects. So stands of trees for breeding would show significant variation in every trait. And one consistency, for example, was southern walnuts would grow taller and wider faster.
Plant plasticity was, I guess, poorly understood at best at this time.
Yeah, we can ask Arna.
Or the better ask Jeeves.
There's no way you remember Ash Jeeves.
No, I don't. But I know you millennials love him. It's like talking to a boomer about Led Zeppelin. Their eyes light up and they're not on the verge of death for 5 seconds.
Well, that hurts. By the end of the 1960s, there were 18 nut cultivars that were widely used for nut production in the central hardwood region. Researchers were working to find a way to produce straighter trees, thinner shelled nuts, and trees that showed stronger resistance to a fungus from Iran that spread across the globe, causing leaf loss and fruit damage. Now, this wasn't all like in one, like expected in each tree, right? So they're having different projects for each of these different areas. So out of that, 6 were for nut producing and so on and so forth. Newer breeders that focused on nut production, which I'm guessing is what our audience is more interested in. The biggest one right now is the Missouri Center for Agroforestry. And what they did is they looked at their Persian walnut breeding project to highlight the goals and methods of a black walnut breeding program. Now, in Persian walnuts, wide-spreading tree crowns have proven to be most productive, so that's been a focus. Also similar to the Persian walnut, spur-bearing in eastern black walnut greatly increases productivity.
Yes, spur-bearing.
Like them cowboys with their spurs on their boots. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, what?
I'm speechless.
Okay.
First time ever.
I am so proud of you. So, for folks that aren't familiar with the term spur-bearing, this basically refers to, and I think we covered it a little bit in the fruit orchard episode, like 12 or something like that. The idea of like, if you have a tree growing that produces some kind of fruit or nut, or in this case a drupe, they sometimes have these short, compact branches that they'll grow one year, they'll only be like 3 or 4 or 6 inches. And then the second year, they'll start producing fruit in clusters on. So if you've been to like an apple orchard and there's large amounts of fruit on each branch, if you actually look at them, they're not on the big branch. They're on these little branches that come off of it. So having more of these means you're going to produce more fruit, right? Now, the counterweight to increasing this annual production is working to even out the year-to-year yield, because anyone that's harvested nuts knows that you have what's called mast years, right? These years that have massive nut drop. So you want to basically, if you're going to try to make this an actual crop that people can rely on every year, that means you can't have these huge swings in the nut production. So part of increasing production is also trying to reduce the variability of a mast and non-mast year. And high production years can impact the following year's crop, because that means there's reduced availability of nutrients and all the things that the tree needs to be able to produce a high volume of nuts, right? Basically, we have to figure out ways to produce more, but also produce more evenly from year to year.
Okay, so trying to bring it back to something that I know, like there's corn in everything, and it's kind of not cool, but at the same time, it's also nice to not have to worry about whether or not having a mast year is going to mean people eat or not.
Yeah, but think all the like fun tree crop based Hunger Games that we could put together.
Do you think you do well in those, bud?
No, I'd go down pretty quick. Maybe I'd do the thing where I just hide in the mud.
Be a mud man.
Mud man.
I could see Matt being a mud man.
Totally see you being a mud person. I could see mud people.
Yep.
That would not be a hard sell for me to be like, that's a mud man.
Hey,
don't worry about it.
Check it out. It's the mud man.
It makes a lot of sense. The science is behind this. Science is just our subjective opinion, but
I'm
science.
glad it's behind it. Either way.
At this point, we're about halfway into the episode. We really haven't discussed anything about indigenous stewardship at this point, which is kind of out of not the way we usually do things. Now, while there's evidence of chestnut and butternut pollen in the northeastern United States around 6,000 years ago, black walnut only appeared sparingly in records until roughly 500 years ago, which is only about the same time that corn showed up. So that's not very far back at all. Now, while part of that is that while chestnuts, oaks, and hickories thrive in rocky and acidic soils, which is like basically the entire east coast of North America, a tree that requires those really deep, rich, fertile soils doesn't really have a lot of support in terms of ecosystem to be here, right? it did a lot better in places like west of the Appalachians. So are you guys ready to nerd out on this a little bit harder?
Hell yeah.
You know I'm not. I don't know anything about black walnuts, but I'll dig deep with you, buddy.
He's gonna dig deep.
Let's dive in.
While I sink my teeth deep into this information.
Do you have to dig for walnuts? No, they come from a tree, right?
Yeah, we're not digging for walnuts. You can dig for D's nuts.
Man, we should.
And we're going to leave it there.
How do we get this far into the episode without a D's nuts?
I don't like it.
Because I just had to set you up.
Ugh.
D's nuts?
Sounds like a terrible date.
Okay.
Ready for you, Andy? Went to a horrible Italian restaurant and I ended up digging for D's nuts.
Was not on the menu. D's nuts.
We should take a break. Let's just cut it right here.
Are you looking for a sexy Halloween costume with an ecological twist? Come on down to the Prole's Farming Emporium and Sexy Halloween Warehouse, where we have such favorites as Sexy Upper Middle Class Farmer, Sexy Goat, Teats Optional, Sexy Ivermectin, Sexy Perennial Fruit and Nut Trees, Sexy Swale and Pond Systems, and Blueberry Bush. Find us at our new home on the web, proles.com.
Welcome back. Let's get into this really niche fucking, first off, shout out to the person who helped me get this paper, because it's not online, like anywhere, like Sci-Hub or whatever. This guy, M.W. Wyckoff, his research, we're gonna talk about it. So this idea of this late arrival of black walnuts on the East Coast is really proposed only recently in 1991 through this guy M.W. Wyckoff's research, where he suggests that the distribution of black walnut trees in central New York specifically lines up with the locations of the Five Nations settlements.
Yeah, shout out to M.W. Wyckoff. Yes.
I gotta say, MW as author initials, pretty sweet. That's a sweet author sounding name.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean,
M.W. Wyckoff.
Something though in general about the first and middle initials before their last names. It just makes anyone sound important, right?
Yeah, I don't know your middle initial, so I can't.
No, you don't. You never will. Never.
You wouldn't expect it.
Do you remember my middle name?
I do.
Really? It's Allison, isn't it?
I don't remember yours. I think I do, but I don't actually. It's definitely one that when I hear it, I'd be like, yeah, I knew it.
Sad, I can't do that. No middle name.
No, well, I mean, I've known Elliot since I was 6, so I'm pretty sure I've heard his mom yell it at him a million times. I might have blacked it out.
Probably. She was scared when she yelled, man.
Yeah, she was. As a little white kid in your house, I was like, oh shit, this is how I die. All right, so, Wyckoff. He makes this claim, right? And now what's interesting is that he also makes the point that not only are these in this location, around these Five Nations settlements, but also that these black walnuts are isolated from any other black walnut populations at the time. And that suggests that the people who lived there deliberately planted these trees. And more importantly, they transported them from hundreds of miles away, along with other species like hackberry.
Would they walk 500 miles?
They might.
No, they'd be making their way downtown, walking fast. Is this the Haudenosaunee people?
Yeah, I'm not saying that on record.
Haudenosaunee?
Probably, but I'm not pronouncing that.
Haudenosaunee.
Dasani? What?
Haudenosaunee.
I'm drinking Elliot's favorite brand, Great Water.
No, that's your favorite brand.
Not Dasani.
It's been recalled.
That's your
Don't
favorite.
drink it, Andy. It's what making you sick. You've got hepatitis A.
It's making you sick.
Yes, Elliot, thank you for that advice not to eat anything from Walmart ever again, because it's killing me.
I didn't come up with that.
This is my strictly recording water. I don't drink it any other time.
That explains it.
Maybe. All right, so the point of his research, and I think it's pretty strong evidence of how plants were selected and propagated when they were believed to have value. The black walnut really, we've been talking about them for their nut value, but they actually have a lot more value than just the nuts.
More than just the nuts. Sounds like an origin story. Are you telling me what was it more than just food? Could they use it for I don't know, lubricant or something? What were they using it for?
If Norm found a way to lubricate with his black walnuts.
With his nut oil?
With his nut oil. It's the Norm origin story.
Jesus.
The Norigin story.
I swear. you got to give it up, man. You can't just, you're not going to invent any new words. It's not going to happen.
There's no way the word Norwegian exists.
All the compound words that will ever exist now, unless you're German.
That's a weird addendum to throw on there.
In like 300 years, this podcast is going to come up as like the origin for these like everyday words we say.
Oh, hell yeah, I hope so. Like this weird podcast that no one listened to, but certain words got like stuck in people's brains like a fucking tumor. Like, yeah.
That's what it is.
You're welcome. I got you.
All right.
And that word is Norwegian.
Back to the research.
Norwegian.
I can't.
So, to Elliot's point, there were a lot of different uses. So you have the bark of the black walnut, and that was used by a number of different Native American communities. It was used in tea. As a disease remedy agent. It was chewed or applied for toothaches and snake bites and headaches. It was used for making dyes, like a dark brown or a black dye. The leaves could be pulverized for the treatment of ringworm. Cherokee specifically used the leaves for a green dye. And even some folks used it at the leaves as an insecticide.
Damn. Black walnut was like the Windex of its time.
Yeah, I could see that, but just tell me you're not using Windex for toothaches.
No, I'm just for casual drinking.
Fair enough.
As long as you're not drinking it with bleach, you're fine. You can't mix the ammonia and bleach.
And I've always said that. I've always said that.
Right. Now, the nuts were also eaten as nuts, but they're also ground and added to pemmican, soups, and baked goods. Black walnuts are super oily. Oftentimes that was used to flavor drinks. Especially in the Southwest, where it was mixed with agave pulp. When the black walnut was discovered by colonists, they brought it back to Europe, even though they had the English and Persian walnuts. However, despite this, even by the 17th century, the French were developing really complex silvicultural systems around these trees. So they were making these managed forests that were designed around like a coppicing with standards model.
And I still, to this day, cannot hear the word coppicing without thinking about mulberry leaves and how they're supposedly edible.
And that was by design.
Man, Andy's playing chess and we're playing checkers.
I can see Elliot drooling. He's thinking about those mulberry leaves right now. You can't just shake your head. I see it.
Shaking my damn head.
But your heart says yes.
SMH.
For our listeners, in this audio format.
Do you remember what coppicing with standards is, Elliot?
I'm going to assume it doesn't mean what it sounds like.
You're going to have to explain that.
Like having standards versus doing whatever you want with the coppicing.
They love a good standardization.
This is how the West won, is that standardization. I'm telling you. Anyways, but coppicing with standards means cutting a tree down to its roots, allowing all those shoots to come back up, but keeping just one as the main trunk, while all the other shoots are cut on like a shorter cycle. So it gives you like the benefits of like a canopy tree, as well as having those young shoots that you can use for like a number of other things.
Yeah, so the best of both worlds. You've got like a mass producing and like timber producing tree in the middle, and then all these like coppice stools around that you can use for other things that you're saying is like on a shorter rotation.
Basically, yeah. The main reservation people have with black walnuts is around the chemical compound juglone. So first off, what is juglone?
So I feel like I know what this is. We've talked about this before, right?
Have we?
I think so. You've mentioned it before. It's like a byproduct. I don't know if it's a toxin of the tree, like if it's a waste or a byproduct, but it makes it so that nothing likes to grow around the juglone.
I thought it was the people that paint their faces like clowns.
I see you talking about ICP.
Juggalos? Juggalones.
Woo woo.
Piss juggalones. Look at that.
God.
Bring it all together.
Always bring it back to the piss jugs.
It's
I mean, that's what we're all about, really.
It's the worst. Am I right or not?
Yeah.
It's the worst. That is our new bumper sticker.
Am I right about the juglone?
Yeah, kind of. And that's the problem. Juglone has a very specific reputation. We're going to talk about that because it's much more complicated than people think. I thought I was going to get more pushback on that from you, Elliot, but all right, let's do it.
No, I'm ready to nerd out with you. I said that after the second commercial break.
All right. Let's do it. So juglone is an organic compound with the molecular formula C10H6O3. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything to me either.
It's like a fucked up sugar.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I never had chemistry in high school or college or biology.
I took a little bit, but I remember a lot.
I shouldn't have graduated high school. Now, in 1921, M.T. Cook, great name.
Another classic.
At the Virginia Agricultural Experiment Station, discovered that tomato plants near black walnut were adversely affected, showing wilted leaves.
You know what? And this is coming from a double letter name, so it's like automatically trustworthy.
Yep. And Andy's pseudonym that he's been trying out is CD's Nuts.
We're trying, Elliot.
No, we're not.
Okay, fine.
You just outed Andy's pen name. He's been writing into a lot of newspapers as CD's Nuts.
That's how we.
Now they're gonna find out.
That's how we joined the NNGA.
Have some strongly worded letters to the New York Times about their font choice. Now they're gonna know. It's like that TikTok reel. Who's gonna know? They're never gonna know.
Pathetic. They're gonna know.
They're gonna know. This is not something that they just discovered in the 20s. There's this very long history of belief that walnuts in general were not good for crops or other species. This went back all the way to Pliny the Elder, who wrote in his Naturalis Historia, in quote, "The shade of the walnut even caused headaches in man and injured anything planted in the vicinity," end quote. So, like, walnut has historically been this, like, textbook example of allelopathy. But the question is it valid?
Yes.
No.
What do you guys think?
Based on your tone and your love of making things complicated, I'm going to say both.
That's fair. A big break in the case against black walnut came in 1928 when Everett Davis of the Virginia Agricultural Experiment Station presented the results of a study describing a newly isolated chemical from black walnut. To examine this claim, we should circle back to the original experiment by Everett Davis. His experiment involved direct stem injection of unknown concentrations of juglone without mention of a control group. All that remains today of this experiment is the published abstract of a presentation. Nothing that could ever be recreated. Not that we necessarily need to, because many tests have been done since. The test that followed to confirm this discovery applied juglone at far higher concentrations than would ever be found in nature. In the field tests often relied on anecdotal evidence from crop failures at the edges of agricultural fields, where failure would otherwise still be more common.
So it sounds like it does affect plants, but just not as bad or negatively as people thought.
We're getting there.
Oh, we're going to make sense of this whole thing, huh? You're going to try to make that happen?
Yeah. We went down a rabbit hole on this one. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in a 3-year study, researchers assessed the same plants with exposure to black walnut and found no significant plant growth differences. And that was based on exposure to black walnut. While evidence has shown juglone to have negative effects, its impacts have not been consistently proven. For every test that has shown it inhibits growth, another test has been shown otherwise.
Oh my god. The BTSD is back, boys.
That's right. Sounds like he's heading into biochar territory.
Bad
it's
and
good. It's bad. It's bad, but then it's good.
It's good when it's bad. It's good when it's bad, but bad sometimes
when it's
might
too
be good.
But then when it goes like really bad, it comes back around to like
it's a horseshoe sort of thing, but it's bad and good. Did we get this right, Andy?
It's music to my ears. You nailed it. And to this point, the fact that there's inconsistent results should highlight that there's something more to this walnut wilt caused by juglone than what's being tested, right? And the fact that researchers have documented juglone in other common plants, including Fabaceae, beans, the most commonly recommended companion crop, should also give some pause, right? Now, what this should mean is that it's clearly not as simple as black walnuts equal juglone equal poor companion plant. In fact, research is beginning to understand and explain some of this, although there's still a bunch of work left to be done. One thing that has become clear is that juglone is not distributed evenly across the tree, and that distribution changes based on a number of factors, including time of year. These concentrations are further complicated, being unique on a tree-by-tree basis. Now, while it's produced in the leaves, evidence seems to be pointing to the roots carrying most of the juglone within the plant.
Okay, so I'm trying to keep up here. The plants create juglone, but not at the same amounts in each plant. And it's also seasonal, and it starts in one part of the plant, but that specific part isn't the problem.
So it's messy enough to just assume it's all bad?
That it would be the easy answer.
Nice. I like easy.
But only in the few last decades have researchers begun exploring this process in further detail.
Ah, of course.
Now, new studies are suggesting that there's a number of factors that dictate how much juglone is made available in the soil for other plants, including the soil composition itself, the microbial community, the time of year, soil organic matter, and even the clay content specifically within the soil. And while seasonal differences were measurable, they were not significant, and soils showed that they were often capable of breaking down small amounts of juglone before it ever reached another plant.
Never let grow, Jack.
Matt, I know you said the line, but somehow this is Andy's fault.
Thank you. I appreciate the benefit of the doubt here.
You're welcome, I guess. I don't know. So the question of where the juglone is coming from is also an important one. Now, in the study where they made these discoveries about the soil types and so on, they also trialed using root barriers to assess the impact of roots and juglone concentration, which showed that the areas where the roots had been blocked had 80% lower amounts of juglone in the soil. Interesting. Further, the areas where the roots had been barricaded from expanding further showed significantly higher amounts of juglone than any other parts of the root system.
Okay, so it's the roots mostly. But I don't even want to ask questions anymore because I know I'm going to change my mind about what I think about 10 times in the next 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
So is it the roots, not the roots?
It could be the roots.
It could be the roots.
Now, this raises the obvious question. How does this juglone eventually break down? A very specific bacterium called Pseudomonas putida, isolated from soil beneath black walnut trees, has been found to metabolize juglone, and there are probably others that are specialists for this particular compound. Now, when in contact with this bacterium, juglone is converted into, and I'm not going to be able to do this one, 3-hydroxyjuglone, then more slowly to 2-3-dihydroxybenzoate, and further to 2-hydroxymuconic acid semialdehyde. Did I get that, Elliot?
Yeah, you nailed it. I'm just trying to think if I've seen any of those in the drugs that I've taken before. I don't think I have.
You know what? That was impressive as hell. Let's just appreciate that pronunciation for a second.
Hell yeah.
It's organic chemistry.
Can suck on these nuts.
Nope,
You had it. You almost sounded like you earned a high school diploma, and then you ruined it.
You were so close.
I did, and I do that though. Here's the thing, is that we have no idea what the allelopathic potential for these byproducts from the juglone degradation is. Like, we don't know anything about them. However, the evolutionary development of this bacterium to specialize would suggest that the juglone, in fact, is a consistent chemical around walnuts, and as we've covered, other species, and the question is whether or not the chemical is metabolized quickly enough, and further, what are the impacts of those untested chemical compositions?
Can we just chalk this up to one of life's little mysteries?
I mean, it sounds like there's just a whole lot more research that needs to be done, because I'm guessing if there's something that metabolizes the compound, its waste or byproduct or whatever has to be used by other plants, because that's just the way all this works, right?
Yeah, basically. And we're just starting to, like, instead of just being like juglone bad, starting to say, all right, let's understand what its kind of role is in this ecosystem, right? And there's one little thing worth talking about more on this subject. One little paper that kind of explains the inconsistencies of these testings comes from a really rather boringly titled research piece called, in quote, Bioassays for Allelopathy in Terrestrial Plants, end quote. I know, sounds super exciting. Now, in this paper, they argue that the factor that is consistently inconsistent in much of the research is plant density. Reduced growth at low but not at high plant densities is very difficult to explain on the basis of resource competition.
So you're talking about like the planting of the test plants into black walnut soils, right?
Exactly. So one implication of this experiment is that even when juglone is present in toxic amounts, toxicity may not be manifested if the target plant density is high enough. In other words, by planting densely, The test subjects, tomato plants, whatever it might be, are able to redistribute the amount of juglone, reducing the juglone in soil per plant. Now, while the evidence of this is slim, it does help close some of those conflicting pieces of research.
So they basically spread out the juglone and sort of share the pain of having to deal with it, but because it's spread out over mini plants, it looks like it has no effect.
Yeah, that's what they believe, at least. Now, while
dilution is the solution to
herd immunity type shit, but with plants.
Yeah,
yeah,
they're spreading it about. Like if everyone has it, then none of us have it too badly. And the reality is that while testing has been applied around juglone and plant toxicity, it's actually much more limited than you might think. Elliot doesn't believe me.
Nope. Still shaking my
He's
head.
looking at me.
My head's starting to hurt. Been shaking it for a while.
There is substantial circumstantial evidence to suggest that juglone contributes to those instances of walnut wilt or those plants suffering by being near black walnut, but the lack of actual quantifiable, repeatable data, as we pointed out, between laboratory and field studies leaves even the basic hypothesis really poorly supported. It's not to say I don't believe that juglone is an issue, but rather there's a significant gap in data-backed field evidence to account for the, I guess you could call them the diversity of players in a forest versus, say, like a laboratory, right? So the takeaway to me is that juglone does negatively impact plants around them, but there are a lot of things you can probably do to reduce the risks of having black walnuts if you really want to. So if you love the taste of foot, listen up. You can do things like taking IMOs from mature black walnut sites where those bacterium are common to make sure you're planting densely around the black walnuts to reduce how much that juglone is isolated to each plant, just like we talked about. There are a number of ways that we could start trying to figure out how to get around this issue without it being like I can't plant black walnut because it's going to destroy my food forest, blah, blah, blah bullshit.
I mean, I do believe this man loves the taste of a good foot, because who else would say something like that?
Listen, we don't kink shame here, Elliot.
This is a good time to let our listeners know that this episode is brought to you by feetfinder.com.
Be the foot fetish, taste the foot fetish.
Ugh, no.
It's like the old Skittles commercial about the rainbow.
Ugh, gross.
Be the rainbow, taste the rainbow. Oh, okay. Last thing I want to bring up, and then we can be done with this. Processing black walnuts is a pain in the butt. It's arguably one of the biggest challenges of black walnuts being a staple in our diet, is that the nuts are just like hard to process. Historically, for cracking like cup-like depressions in the size of the nut were picked into like small boulders or slabs of shale, and then the nut would be like placed in the depression, and they'd literally have to use 2 stones to crush it. Now today, the most commonly recommended nutcracker on the homestead scale for people listening here is Grandpa's Goody Getter, but it still is really designed for individual use, and it's expensive. It's I think it's almost like $200.
So what exactly are you getting for a $200 nutcracker?
Granny's goodies, obviously.
Oh my God. Why? Why is this happening to me?
That was very good, man. I'm very proud of you. The first major attempt at scalable black walnut processing came kind of as a secondary effort of the pecan processing industry with a certain man named E.A. Smaley's Smaley Manufacturing Company. Until this point, and even for decades longer, most black walnut processing was done by employees using hammers to crack the nuts and separating the shell from the nut meats by hand, as the Gravette Shelling Company, for example, did well into the 60s. Almost all of these companies focused on making black walnuts a viable crop stemmed from the same region, the western half of Appalachia. Again, think about what we talked about before. That's where those trees had historically been. Many companies came and went, all trying to crack the nut of making a viable black walnut industry.
I love you, buddy, but I hate you at the same time.
Good.
I just wish you'd stop.
Many lasted only a few years, offering new techniques, many of which were ineffective or not scalable. Gravette Shelling Company, the folks still using hammers to crack open nuts into the 60s, was later purchased by Hammond's Products Company, which today is the largest producer of black walnuts. While they've refined the process of separating the nut meat from the shell, their equipment is proprietary but offers some insight into the potential for scaling up this type of processing.
Sounds like capitalist propaganda to me.
I mean, it should, but it does point to the fact that we could do this. Like, the technology is there. But what's actually even more important and interesting to me is their business model. Now, you would think a black walnut company would like grow black walnuts, but they don't. They own no trees. They produce 0 walnuts.
You're saying they have no nuts?
No nuts. None of them have nuts there. Their model is based on individuals collecting the fallen nuts from their own trees or from public trees, bringing them to weigh stations where they're paid for the nuts by the pound.
Oh, they have other people's nuts.
Yeah, they have other people's nuts by the pound.
They're pounding other people's nuts by the pound, is what we're saying.
Yes, that's their business model.
Does Norm know about this?
I think Norm was their inspiration.
Oh, God.
Norm's been had.
Yeah, he got capitalized real quick by certain people that were about to get a fucking cease and desist letter. So this model is really interesting because it offers some insight into how many similar like wild foods could potentially be processed at scale. So we've talked about acorns, hickories, chinkapins. All these nuts could be processed in a similar way. Centralizing production in this way and giving a reason for individuals to have a stake in a healthier ecosystem through nut trees in particular is a win-win. The ideal situation would be to set up production under a cooperative model instead of a private model like what they have. Even if an individual didn't care to harvest the nut themselves, you could still plant trees and then get paid by teams of folks that could travel through neighborhoods, increasing efficiency and building the early stages of like a community resource collection team.
Just teams, just folks being teams, legions of nut gatherers.
A coalition of the willing.
There you go, Elliot. Think of it this way. There's a team of folks who harvest wild foods from a community, acorns and hickories, black walnuts, persimmons, and then through the spring they could harvest maple and birch sap. The same way we have like libraries or even tool libraries, we could have processing centers for communities to process their own food. Many of these things have very similar needs in terms of equipment, right? Whether it's maple and birch sap that need to boil a lot of liquid, or canners, or acorn processing with lye and like hot water. There's a lot of these have very similar stuff they need. And either way, you still need the same cooking equipment, tables, so on. So if you have these centers, you could actually process food for a community from a community owned by a community, right? So I think this is like a really interesting way to think about, people always say like, well, how do we do this now instead of waiting for the collapse of capitalism or whatever, right? Well, these are the examples to look to how do you build community and produce food in your community at the same time. Here you go. Currently, according to nuts.com, there is a substantial price difference between black walnuts and English walnuts, about $18.99 as of right now versus $10.99 for English walnuts. So there's still work to be done, but at the very least, like, it's not totally unaffordable. And this should really give folks pause to consider how different ways of processing and relating to food can offer new insights to what it means to create these like place-based food systems.
Cool. I mean, it sounds a lot more fun than going to, I guess, the grocery store. I don't know. I don't even know that's why I started this podcast, to figure out where the fuck my food comes from.
True.
It comes from Norm.
We can just have Andy tell us.
He keeps telling me it's from 3,000 years ago.
This is a 10,000-year-old nut. Why am I eating this?
It could taste like buttery smooth goodness or feet.
You'll love it either way.
It's a roll of the dice.
This is what he's trying to feed me, man. If I bite into a nut and it tastes like blue cheese, like I like blue cheese, but I'm just not ready for that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're not blue yet.
But what you're saying about these, like, community processing centers reminds me a lot of like what you were talking about with Chris Newman on that episode recently about like different ways that like scale and specialization doesn't have to be the, I guess, the way we have it now. It like can work to support rather than like undermine these like local systems of food, like, feeding ourselves.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to this idea of equity, right? How do you have stake and ownership in that process? The scale itself isn't the bad guy. It's about making sure that scale fits to the dynamics around it and to the ability of accountability to the community that it is owned by, right?
Yeah. I mean, this just reminded me of like in where I used to live in Burlington, Vermont, like they had, like even like in the city, they had a cooperative that was like, we'll like tap your maple tree, we'll like collect the sap, and we'll boil it. All you have to do is like let us in. I think when people start like looking at like the food that they can collect around them, a lot of people are like, okay, I have, this tree that's producing mast, or berries or sap, and like, I'm not gonna go invest $200 in a nutcracker machine or like all the equipment I need to like collect and boil syrup. But yeah, some of this community scale stuff can really give these projects a kick in the pants. Maybe that's give these projects
Kick in the nuts.
Kicking the norm's nuts.
Oh my god!
You set it up, man. I thought that's where you were going.
No, I'm done for tonight. That's it. It's over for me.
You say that. No, but I think your point is that access to
I can't carry on this conversation. I'm sorry. It's awful.
Access to the equipment is so high that people won't engage with it. But if you have it through a community where there's no money, I'm not going to go spend $300 on a nut.
I'll sum it up with a fucking fortune cookie. Many hands make light work. That applies to an economic system. It applies to food. It applies to fucking everything. So just deal with that.
Deal with that.
Deal with them.
Get these big, black, sweaty nuts.
Listen,
from Elliot.
It's hard to process. All right, Andy. It's hard to process these nuts, right?
These nuts. Well, this has been fun, everyone.
This has been atrocious.
Has it?
Sorry, everyone.
Has it been fun?
It's been a more unique episode. I will say that. We got into some shit.
Should we give them a teaser for the next episode? Or are we still talking about nuts?
Next week we have an interview. As of this moment, it has not been recorded, but I'm very excited about it. So once it actually happens, I can say the name, but I don't want to. And anytime I've ever done that, we've had an issue and didn't get it recorded in time. So I'm not going to do that.
Yes. Dom like dub a different name over it.
Yes. It'll be like, and we're really excited about George's nuts. Yeah. No. So yeah, I'm real excited, but it's going to tie into black walnuts. And we got a few more nut episodes before we get into the next series, so I'm looking forward to getting nutty with these two nutheads.
That's fun. Well, thank you for listening to the Poor Pro's Almanac, and we hope you come back and nut with us again.
Nut all over Elliot.
Oh my god,
we'll
you guys need to figure out some better jokes for these next episodes.
No.
I mean, they write themselves.
I hate it here.
Welcome to my life.
feetfinder.com. Be the foot fetish. Taste the foot fetish.